Hello there, this is Cart123 today, and if none of you noticed, this is my 100th video upload. Woo! And thanks to all my subscribers, my watchers, my likers, and commentators. This video I put together to thank you. It is also going to be about my favorite video gaming franchise. Can anyone take a guess? No? It's The Legend of Zelda. But this won't just be any video. It'll be a video about some weird and strange facts about the series you may have never even known. So here is 25 different things you didn't know about The Legend of Zelda. Number 1. The Japanese versions of Zelda 1 and 2 had different music. Many NES classics weren't released on the proper NES in Japan. Instead, they were released for a peripheral called the Famicom Disk System. The FDS hooked up to the original Famicom and offered the ability to save games, along with a few hardware tweaks like an extra sound channel. Nintendo had to put batteries into the cartridges to allow for save games. Many developers had to cut music entirely, but in Zelda's case, the extra sound channel meant that some of its music tracks and sound effects were completely different. Number 2. There was a dedicated Zelda handheld. Nintendo released a Zelda game in its line of dedicated LCD Game & Watch units in 1989. Based on the original Legend of Zelda for the NES, the game is not only the last Game & Watch, but as the last handheld Nintendo would release before the Game Boy. Number 3. A chip shortage delayed Zelda 2. There was more reasons for gamers having to wait for NES games rather than slow localizations. The demands for titles were so high that many famous games, including Zelda 2, were significantly delayed in their American releases due to a chip shortage in 1988. At least, that's what Nintendo claimed. The company was operating in the wake of a Cabbage Patch doll craze, and Collecto had allegedly used artificial sources to generate the hype. Even the ABC show 2020 questioned the authenticity of the shortage. It reminds us of the release of a certain console in 2006. Number 4. Link's Awakening was censored in America. Oh, the days of Nintendo's draconian content restrictions. They gave us boring and bloodless Mortal Kombat and censored localizations of many Japanese games, including Link's Awakening. The character Shkull paints a picture in the game. While American gamers were none the wiser, Japanese players were treated to a tasteful nude hippo, as well as the introduction background. The items in the mermaid were different. The dungeon hints and some dialogue were changed. Number 5. Link to the Past had a hidden room you've probably never seen. Nintendo Power, until it got shut down anyway, used to have all sorts of contests that would let fans design content or get in their names into sequels of their favorite games. One lucky fan got his name into Link to the Past. Too bad nobody could find it. It was hidden away in a secret room, only accessible by breaking the game, with a plaque that simply read, "My name is Chris Hooligan. This is my top secret room. Keep it between us, okay?" Sure. No problem. Number 6. Fox McLeod hates Link. As Smash Bros. Proves, not all Nintendo characters get along. Fox McLeod of Star Fox fame apparently hates Link, and even goes after him in Ocarina of Time with some hacking. The reason the R-Wing is in the gaming code is that the movement of Avalgia, a dragon boss in Death Mountain, uses the same movement as the R-Wing. Nintendo programmed the R-Wing to fly right beside Vivalgia, but then took it out. But they left in the coding for any of you hackers out there. With a little coaxing from an action replay or a similar cheating device, players can discover a very aggressive version of Star Fox Starship, the R-Wing, that will attack Link on sight in the middle of Kokiri Village. Number 7. Twilight Princess on the Wii is backwards. Outraged fans raged at the right-handed Link in the Wii version of Twilight Princess. Link had always been a lefty, unless you count the right-handedness caused by the NES sprite flipping. Miyamoto modeled that aspect off the character himself. Well, most people, around 85% of them, are right-handed. Nintendo did not want any confusion with the sword controls in their flagship Wii title. Except they didn't just change Link. They mirrored the entire game world, making life a pain for underpaid strategy guide writers and gamers everywhere. Number 8. Ocarina of Time had an expansion pack. The N64 signature title was not originally an N64 game. During the early production of Ocarina of Time, it was developed for the 64DD, an optical disc drive that never came out in America and lived a short life in Japan. Even after the game moved to the N64 proper, Nintendo continued to work on the Ocarina of Time Master Quest, an improved version of the game with lots of new content. It never saw release on the short-lived peripheral, but it was released as a pre-order bonus for Wind Waker on the GameCube. Number 9. Skyward Sword is not the same game announced in 2009. The Skyward Sword we saw at last year's E3 is not the game Nintendo originally started working on. In 2009, McLeod claimed the next Zelda game would not be radically different from previous versions. However, 4 months later, the game's producer, Anoma, said that he and McLeod had agreed to not follow the same template and to change things up. McLeod echoed those sentiments in May of 2010, so sometime in 2009, Skyward Sword underwent major design revision. Number 10. Ocarina of Time had a song removed. Remember the File Temple music from Ocarina of Time? Don't be so sure. If you played the game immediately after its release, you've heard a slightly different track than those who bought later versions of the game. The original version had a Muslim prayer looped into it, and was later removed to avoid causing an uprise of offense. Number 11. There was almost a Zelda 1 remake for the Game Boy. The Oracle games originally started out as a remake of the original NES Legend of Zelda. Okatamo of Capcom approached Miyamoto with the idea, and after much back and forth, got the go-ahead. Unfortunately for Okamoto, he was over his head with his team's tweaks to the original game resulted in an entirely new overworld map. Number 12. There was supposed to be a third Oracle game. When Okamo ran into trouble attempting to remake The Legend of Zelda for the Game Boy Color, Miyamoto came to the rescue with his idea for a trilogy called the Triforce series. Over time, this planned trilogy produced 2 Game Boy Color Zeldas, Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages. What happened to the third one? Even Miyamoto's reworked concept proved too difficult, and Capcom scaled the planned trilogy down to 2 titles. Poor Miyamoto. Number 13. Link's Awakening is based on a non-Zelda game. Fans have always noted how different the story of Link's Awakening is to other Zelda titles. That's because, despite the Zelda name, it's more of a sequel to a little-known Japan-only title, The Frog Whom the Bell Trolls, than any other Link to the Past. There's even characters from The Frog Whom the Bell Trolls in the game. The exiled Prince Richard makes a cameo. Number 14. Tangle has his own games. Wait, Tangle, you say? Yup. For those of you who don't know, Tangle is a very confused man who thinks he's a fairy. Western fans love to hate him, but he's popular enough to have his own series of games in Japan. Everyone in Japan loves him. His 4-game series reign began in 2007 with freshly picked Tangle's Rosy Rupee Land, which tells Tangle's origin story and was released only in Japan and Europe. Nintendo of America passed on the opportunity to publish the game. Tangle's Balloon Fight DS was a prize for Club Nintendo Platinum members. 2009 saw the release of Ripening Tangle's Balloon Trip of Love in Japan, along with the Too Much Tangle pack for DSiWare. Number 15. Crazy Tracy from Link's Awakening is in another game. Captain Rainbow, a Japan-only Nintendo game featuring washed-up Nintendo characters that never earned a following, features the oft-forgotten Crazy Tracy from Link's Awakening. She lives in the center of the island where most of the game takes place, in a grand mansion where she plots to enslave the men of the world. When talking about Captain Rainbow, many overlook Tracy's appearance in favor of discussing an unfortunate scene where the players must scour Birdo's room for her vibrator. No, seriously guys, this is not the first time Nintendo has had the urge to include vibrators. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Super Princess Peach. Number 16. There's a 16-bit remake of Zelda 1. While children were busy being bored by the Sega Channel in America, kids in Japan were playing around with Satellite View, an add-on professional of the SCNS that hooked up to satellite TV like the Sega Channel hooked up to the cable. Games were broadcast at set times, and system owners had to be ready to play, all titles that had to be played in one sitting. 3 Zelda titles were released on the system, one which was the remake of the original NES title with freshly updated 16-bit graphics and a sound, a la Mario All-Stars. 17. There are 2 Zelda games you'll probably never play. There were more 2 broadcast satellite games. Broadcast Satellite The Legend of Zelda, The Ancient Stone Tablets was a complete Zelda title broadcast over 4 weeks in 1997. The Legend of Zelda Triforce of Gods was a version of Link to the Past broadcast, especially for the system. While technically ROM files for these games are out there and playable, they live nature to the original broadcast systems, which means you will never be able to play them as they were originally intended. Number 18. Zelda games came out for non-Nintendo systems. Well, excuse me, Princess. You say you've already seen clips of the disastrous CDI Zelda games on YouTube. But do you know the reason Nintendo allowed these abominations to exist? In the mid-90s, Sega had made significant inroads to the console market, and through their Sega CD add-on was a commercial flop. Nintendo still used the need to combat it. It struck a deal with Philips to create a CD-ROM add-on, but as most of us know, it was never actually released. The deal left Philips with the rights to use Mario and Zelda in its own CDI games, which it did, ensuring fodder to YouTube comedy videos for years to come. Number 19. Some non-Nintendo Zelda games were actually good. Not all instances of Nintendo lending out its IP out to outsiders ended in disaster. When Nintendo teamed up with Capcom, it gave us 3 separate handheld classics. Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons, and the Minish Cap were all designed by Capcom, not Nintendo. Despite Capcom's success, Philips' failure still makes fans flinch when Nintendo announces new partnerships. Number 20. Zelda is part of a complete balanced breakfast. The 80s were a Nintendo crazy era. Zelda and Mario even got their own breakfast cereals. Called the Nintendo Cereal System, each box was divided into Mario and Zelda sides. It was typical marshmallow-based licensed cereal. Yes, there was enough of these things to call it typical. Like all other sugar-packed cereals, it was billed as part of a complete nutritious breakfast that, according to commercials, consisted of milk, orange juice, 2 bowls of cereal, a stack of heavily buttered toast, and premature death due to childhood diabetes. You're welcome. 21. The US version of Zelda 1 removed a feature. The NES we got in the US was not completely identical to the original Japanese Famicom. The Famicom featured in hardwired controllers, a top-loading cartridge slot, and a microphone. The Pole's voice enemies that populate the game could be killed by yelling into the microphone. With no such peripheral in the NES, the functionality was removed from the American version. However, hints to the original nature of the game still exist in the English instruction manual, which claims that Pole's voice is sensitive to loud noises. Number 22. A work-in-progress Zelda version 1 leaked on the internet. Nintendo is renowned for their secrecy. That is why there is such a big deal when a prototype ROM of The Legend of Zelda leaked on the internet in 2010. Made on the Fatcon disk system, the version of the game is not only significantly easier, but even features different art from some of the enemies. Number 23. There is a lot of debug stuff left on Wind Waker disk. When game makers finish a game, they don't usually go through the meticulously wipe their footprints away. Instead, they lock up the data and call it good enough. This means that clever hackers can access this data and get a good look at possible alternative versions, levels, or cut features, as Rockstar heard the hard way with the hot coffee scandal. While Wind Waker doesn't have any hidden, special scenes, it does feature music, weapons, and superfluous rooms used for bug testing. The recent event of PC GameCube emulation has allowed curious individuals the chance to access and play around with these hidden items. 24. Ocarina of Time was almost a first-person game. Early on, Zelda creator Miyamoto was pushing for Ocarina of Time to take place entirely in first person, so as to emphasize the vastness of Hyrule Field. thankfully, he changed his mind once the young Link/old Link dynamic was put into place, as he felt it was important that the player see the difference. The idea would be revisited in Link's crossbow training for Wii in 2007. Number 25. Each Legend of Zelda game has a distinct theme written by the same guy. Koji Kondo, the man responsible for the most memorable Zelda and Mario tunes of all time, still works on the series. To keep things fresh, he likes to have different theme for each game, as he told Nintendo Power in 2006. Each game in the Zelda series has a slightly different vibe. Majora's Mask has an exotic Chinese opera sound, and Wind Waker has a sort of an Irish influence of the music. As we start thinking about music for Twilight Princess, I got some guidance from the developers that they like music reminiscent of Eastern Europe. Alright, so, I'm sorry I messed up on talking a few times. That's a lot to say for one video for me. But that is my 100th video upload. I hope you guys enjoy it very much, and maybe if this video gets a lot of likes or something, maybe I'll do some more. Alright, I'll talk to you guys later. Have a wonderful day. Peace out, Girl Scouts.